Welcome, USA Today bestselling author Danika Bloom.
Hello. Hello, hello, hello.
And in case listeners don't know, can you tell them a little bit about yourself and your writing?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's a delight for me to be here, Sarah. So the short answer is who I am as a writer right now in this iteration of my writing career in life is I am a rom-com author and written and published 9, I believe 10 by July. Funny romance, contemporary romance, and just leaning right into the rom-com now. But in my past, I have 25 years as a technical ghostwriter, and I have written and published books under a different name, like nonfiction books that support authors, and also one paranormal women's fiction dark humor book, which we might talk about a little bit later because I rebranded it as Danika when I became Danika. So a long career writing, but not always in romance.
Well, how long have you been writing then? Like total, would you say?
Oh, my very first job as a writer was straight out of university, so over 25 years now.
Wow,
Hmm.
that's awesome. So you do know a bit about like how to construct a story and figure that out. Like, so how long have you, what drew you to romance? I'm just curious.
I belonged to an RWA group because it was the only group in town when I first started writing. And I thought that I didn't know what I wanted to write. I actually, because I come from a background in technical writing and I was reading nonfiction, I always expected that the first book I would publish would be nonfiction. But the only group in town that supported writers was an RWA group. And I had this idea for a book back in 2006. Is that the year? Yes, 2006. My husband left me for another woman, and I processed that by writing my first manuscript. And I called it Drinking Scotch with Strangers. And I thought that I went crazy for the year. I was 40 and I finally lived out my 20s in that one compressed year, which was really silly. But I wrote this book and I knew that I needed help. So I joined this RWA group. So the shorter story is what drew me to romance is I love making people feel good. And I wanted to write books. It was a long journey. It was a really circuitous route to get here because I started thinking about also writing nonfiction around relationships, love, sex, the social expectations that we have on ourselves. And that title, I spent 2 years researching a book called Girls Who Get Themselves in Trouble, The Unholy Communion of Sex, Religion, and Politics. And it was really very much in that nonfiction gonzo journalist like A.J. Jacobs or Mary Roach, who I love as authors. But I realized it was really a downer to write that way. And romance is a way to talk about consent and to talk about pleasure, women's pleasure, in a way that's actually empowering and fun and makes you feel good at the end of the read. So that is how I came to writing romance. It was not, like I know I have so many romance friends that are like, I've been reading romance since I was 12 years old and I always knew I wanted to be a romance author. That wasn't me. It was a social justice, the ability of romance to be a social justice vehicle.
And that's so awesome that you say that because I've heard a lot of authors actually say that is that they use it as some kind of catharsis. A lot of times, the romance genre in like specifically for like expectations of women, what their roles are, and things like that. And usually, a lot of the authors I've talked to, it kind of was their genesis as a romance author kind of came from kind of like what you had mentioned, kind of a darker place or something galvanizing them to do it, like a big event or something like very raw emotional state.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. And in my community, I mean, two different communities, specifically with romance authors in them. And in the one that is kind of the mastermind of romance authors who are almost all award-winning USA Today bestselling, they are accomplished. So many of them have that same kind of idea, like when like you've heard, I'm sure, a lot, romance anthologies are so common. And that is that, I have to do something. I am a person who has a voice, and it is kind of my duty to use that voice to support causes that are important to me and issues that I care about.
Yeah, and I can say I do, after being in the romance community for a while, as like a little bit as a backseat author. I'm still working on that novel, but like uh as a podcaster, it's just such a lovely genre to be in.
Yeah,
Everyone's so nice.
yeah, it really is. I mean, it kind of sounds cliche, but there's so much heart in romance. Yeah, there really is.
Kind of switching gears a little bit, you recently released a contemporary rom-com. Congrats.
Thank you very much.
The Billionaire Shrubbery. And that is book one in a series?
Yeah, it's book one in a new series, which I'm calling Power Couples. The family's name is Power. So that's why it's Power Couples, and they are a billionaire family, 4 brothers who inherit their dad's company, which was their grandfather's and great grandfather's company. So it comes with all the baggage of you are now, you have expectations on you, but it's the rom-com. Definitely, this is my very first like true rom-com, and I love Willpower and Virginia Beach. They're just two quirky opposites attract grumpy sunshine characters who I'm love.
Well, and I love that I was kind of reading a little bit about it, and you had a lot of flower puns, and I kind of love that.
She's a plant whisperer, yes, and he's this bombastic, like Tony Robbins type guy. So they are very much, but they play off each other beautifully. Yeah,
I love it. I love a good opposites attract romance. So you have my heart there.
Thank you.
And as someone kind of we mentioned that's been on the indie author path for a little bit, and you have mentored other authors, right? You have a community.
Yeah, I've been mentoring authors since 2018, I believe, is I co-launched a community with a couple of author friends. It wasn't specifically for romance authors. And for 5 years, I led a mastermind every week. For a while, it was twice a week, all mostly around mindset and motivation, because that's my background lent itself well to that, the psychology and mindset and staying on track and the encouragement and stuff. And in August 2022, sorry, we're 2023, August last year, I broke away from that community. It got to be huge and wanted to work just with romance authors because they are my heart. So yes, I've been supporting authors and specifically romance authors for 1 year, but authors for almost 6 years now. And then actually prior to that, I was on the board of the RWA, our local chapter, for 2 terms and an active member so until we disaffiliated. So yeah, it's been a very long time that I've been working with writers and authors and building community. That is my thing is the community building part of being an author and holding authors in a space where they can be supported and get what they need to keep moving forward.
Well, and I think so many authors, including myself, really know that because it is so easy to get discouraged along the journey. Yeah, I know. And I know you know that too, probably from when your first book, right? And it took you a while to write that first book. I think it might have taken us all to a certain extent, maybe a little while to either work on the first book or at least one book that we've always wanted to try to work on. And you've gathered so much knowledge along the way, along this, indie author journey. Me personally, who has a background in merchandising and marketing, I completely understand like building hype for yourself as an author and for your book before you actually do any kind of launching of any sort or hit that publish button.
Yeah.
So before you do publish, whether it's self-publish or you start querying an agent, what should authors do to help launch themselves into the world?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm so happy that we're talking about this. Because in these like it's been 15 years, like 2006, when I wrote that first manuscript until now, and hundreds of authors that I've worked alongside with, not mentoring all of them, but some of them have mentored me. Many mentored me in those first years before I published in 2016. But one of the things that very rarely, if ever, got talked about was what happens once you hit publish, and what can you do in advance of hitting publish so that you don't either or both feel overwhelmed or disappointed. Like that first book that you publish, there are these emotions of like, I have so much I have to do. There's the overwhelm, and then you hit publish and it's like mwah, mwah, mwah. Like but why am I not, where are all these, like, where's the confetti? Where's everything that I expected? And where's the money? Where's the everything? So one of the first things I think that's really important, and you've talked about this a bit with Kathryn McClatchy in one of your episodes around setting goals as an author. So I think it's really important being a pre-published author is to know exactly what your expectations are of yourself and of your writing before you hit publish. Like, is this a career for you? Or do you just have that one story that's been burning a hole and you have to get it out and then you can breathe again? Like, those are two really different paths to wanting to get your first book published and to, having a successful, not disappointing first publication. So that would be something I would really recommend, is figure out who you want to be once you are a published author. Before you're published, there's one thing I've seen a lot is that authors don't consider themselves authors. And so as they're writing, they're like, well, I'm a writer, or maybe I am. I would love for everybody who is in the process of writing a book to start calling yourself an author. If you have to, call yourself a pre-published author, but get into the mindset of being an author. So that's kind of one of the not hard skills, but I think it's really important, because when you launch that first book, if you have confidence behind it, you are going to do so much better than if you're sitting there thinking, I'm really not sure if I am an author yet, because you won't put the energy and the time and the confidence that you need to launch and be your own cheerleader, your own best cheerleader. There's a bunch of research, I guess, like figure out what subgenre of romance, if we're just speaking about romance authors, know what subgenre of romance you're writing, so that when you launch, your marketing is smart, your marketing is clean, your marketing is on point with what readers expect from the type of book that you're publishing. So I would say that's really important. Then there's the things like, do you have a website or not? Should you have a website before you launch? I have opinions. My opinions are that you have to do what you're capable of doing, but it's really can be very valuable to have a simple one-page website before you launch. You don't have any books, I understand that, but you have stories, you have experience, your book has background that you can write about. Or it can just be a landing place where you collect people's email addresses, so that when you launch, you have even 100 people on your list that you can start to get used to talking to. That is really important. In the community that I lead, I've got a program that I've just finished. I've run it twice. I ran it in the fall and I just finished running it again, called Passion Project to Public. And it goes through all of the steps, not all of the steps, it goes through some really strategic steps to being ready to go public and get your first book out there. And having a website is one of those things. Simple, having your email list set up so that you can collect names, and having your automations in place so that when your book launches, you don't have to be thinking about those things. That's part of the overwhelm. There's so much to think about when you launch a book. I can't tell you how many people take a very long time to figure out their pen name, if they're going to have a pen name, what their pen name should be, testing it out, making sure you've got all those, you can get the URL, that the social media isn't already taken. If there's another author with that name, how you can change it so that you're not, you really don't want to have the same name. My other name, so Danika Bloom, is a pen name, which is an anagram of my real name. My real name is actually very common as muck. And there is another author who also writes, I don't even know if it's romance, but she and I have butted heads on Goodreads, not on purpose, but because we both have the same name, our books get put in the wrong places, and it's horrible. You don't want to have that, right? So if you have the opportunity to choose a name that is unique, do it.
Actually, I have a funny story about that. Now, she picked her name first, but I have a girlfriend I know, a writing girlfriend, who chose her pen name before any of this came out. So, and if you want to do a quick search in Amazon or Google. So definitely Amazon would probably be a good place to go, because she does that periodically, and she writes erotica. Like, she writes some hot, steamy stuff too, like romance, but she writes a lot of like romance erotica. And turns out her name is now being used as a children's book. So like she like freaked out, and like she's been, I think, trying to do some like rebranding stuff to try to figure that out. But they came with the name after, but someone did not do their research.
Well, and that's worse for them. It's terrible for them. Like,
I know. And like that was none of her fault. She did
yeah.
everything right. She's had this pen name for years, but like someone else on the children's book side did not do such a good job. Yeah.
No. Yeah. And it's horrible. And it's not going to be, it just makes me, it's not that I get chills. It just makes me gotta go, like,
I know, it gives you the ick and same.
Yeah. And it's because it's a bad reader experience. And it's so important that we not, put in place things that are going to cause a bad reader experience. And one of the other things that if you can, so writing in series is if you're approaching romance as a career or as something that you're going to be doing to generate income, it's pretty well accepted that you've got to write in series to get your audience, right? Because you'll grow your audience more easily and more quickly if you can bring people along, through brothers or a fire department or a gang of girlfriends who do something together, right? And one of the things that can be so beneficial before you launch is to write a novella and to put that novella for free on BookFunnel. You can publish it like a quiet launch or a soft launch on Amazon or wide if you want, but put it for free on BookFunnel or Story Origin and start to gather and grow your list that way. And you'll start to get some feedback. You'll start to get a sense of what it feels like in a quiet way to be a published author without all of the stress of looking at sales numbers and all of the promotions that you need to do to actually get people to see your book on retailers. Because on BookFunnel, if you're not familiar, if people aren't familiar, and Story Origin, the two of them function the same way, you can join group promos. And so you just send an email to your list. People will have to join your list to download your book. And it's a really cost-effective way to start finding people who read in your subgenre and also who write in your subgenre. Because I think the next thing that is really, really important that I highly recommend every author do is find their community of subgenre mates and use each other, grow together and support each other in your launches, in the mindset support that you need, helping each other identify places that you can show up on podcasts, for instance. Like there's all kinds of things. The community that you build around you can be the community that stay with you, through your entire writing career. And that having community for me has been just the biggest gift I think that I've had in since becoming a romance author.
Yeah, that's, I think, bottom line, that's been like one of the best parts about being involved in the writing community is the community itself.
Generous, hugely generous. It's, I've worked in my 25-year career. It was in the nonprofit sector, which a lot of the nonprofit sector is very much cooperative, but there's a lot of competition there as well, because you're competing for whatever, you're competing for funding, you're competing for all the different things. But in the romance community, I personally have not experienced competition. Even though we're all trying to sell our books to the same, like in my rom-com mastermind, we're all trying to find the same readers, but everybody understands that it's an infinite pool of eyeballs or of attention. So, someone might look at my Billionaire rom-com cover and say, not for me, but they'll see Annika Martin's Billionaire rom-com cover and say, that one's for me. And like, I'm delighted that she's getting that reader. There are other readers who are gonna find me.
You make a great point, because that's one thing too that you were mentioning, putting out a novella before you come out maybe with a full novel beforehand as a way to kind of soft launch yourself into the kind of the readership, to your readers as an author. But a lot of times too, I see authors be included in anthologies. We had mentioned that before. Like a
Yeah.
lot of like they'll start that way. And I see so many people like asking, well, who wants to be part of this anthology? Just like kind of a broad, broad strokes kind of call for people who might be interested in that, which I think is really nice to kind of give that
Yeah.
platform to new authors too.
Absolutely. Oh, and and you can take that. There's a really great point. The anthology book will get you your Goodreads author account. It will get you your Amazon author account. And if it publishes wide, it will get you all your other Apple and Google and Barnes and Noble. And you need those, like if you're launching your first book and you don't already like hard launching, like really like popping up into the world and saying, I'm an author. If you're doing that without having Goodreads and all of those other retailers in place, that's a lot of work and a lot of moving pieces, and things aren't smooth. Like you can count on there being hiccups, and it's stressful. So yeah, the anthology is a brilliant way. And then typically those anthologies are short term, like they're available for 3 months or 6 months, and then you get your rights back to publish on your own. So if you do that route, when your book comes out of the anthology, you've already got your book written, and you just drop that in and use that to continue to grow your list, because anthologies won't help you grow your list, but they will give you those other pieces. Yeah, it's a great idea.
Yeah. And it helps you. I think it can help you. Let me put it that way. I think it can help you find your readership, because a lot of times, like you said, they might read the story because of one specific author, like some readers might, but then they might come across yours and say like, ooh, I really like this author as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's important. Like I've been in an one shared world, which was a wonderful experience. I've been in 3 anthologies. The anthologies are interesting. I was in one anthology. It was a charity anthology, the first one I was in. And it started out that it was going to be a steamy anthology. And then the person who was organizing it decided that it would actually be all of the different steam levels. And that becomes a little bit of a problem.
Yeah.
So, like I think you could do a whole podcast with someone who's an expert at anthologies and talk about, what to look for in anthology so that you get what is best for you as an author.
Well, I actually have a podcast for that. So, in case listeners, you're curious about anthologies, go back to the Patrice Caldwell episode where we talk about curating an anthology, because she put it together with some of the New York Times bestsellers. She's actually an agent, and now she is a publicity director with New Leaf, I believe, right now.
I should listen to that one. Although I think I've decided that I'm not going to do, well, I've said that, but I was in an anthology that published in January because friends were doing it and it was a cause I cared about. So I probably will be, but
yeah, it's a very fascinating process how she kind of went through it, because I asked her kind of what her theme was, how she, especially in edits, how she kind of went through, because she edited the whole anthology herself too. Yeah. And how she chose what stayed, what went out, how it like served the anthology as a whole, and how she put it together, like how it was structured. Because even in the anthology itself, there are individual stories, but then there's a story structure within the anthology too, of all these little stories. So
that is, yeah. And that's not like any of the anthologies I've ever been in. The ones that I've been in have been more like, do you care about this? Do you want to contribute a book? All right, you're in. Can you pay the either, $20 to $200 to help cover the costs of marketing and the cover and such. So yeah, very different. It's fascinating, but really important to know what you're getting into before you get into it.
it is. And I think kind of what a big part of like starting off as an author is understanding that there's a lot of work that goes on beforehand before you ever get out there and launch your first book, right?
Research, I think, is so important. Like, and when I think about when you said that, one of the things I thought of was, book covers. Just making sure that before you launch, you really understand what the reader's expectations are for the kind of book that you are writing and planning to publish. And that comes down to the cover, it comes down to the blurb, it comes down to many things that you're probably thinking, I like this cover, I like this blurb. What you like is almost irrelevant. you've got to find, you've really got to look at the market and see what the market likes. And if possible, test, which it absolutely is possible to test. So,
And I happen to have an episode for that one too. I try to cover all my bases here, Danika. I'm making sure I'm working hard for the people. So
yes.
It's actually with Sarah Kill, and she does talk about that, which is super fascinating. I never realized how much work, because she stays on top of trends. She stays on top of for like what the covers look like, colors, font being used right now.
Yep.
She even kind of, at the time, which was about a year ago, it was in 2022. She gave me kind of a glimpse of what at that moment was really popular. She said there was a lot of mountain men. That was what the big trends she was seeing right at the moment, that time. She was talking about discrete covers, which I knew they were a thing. I just didn't realize what they were called and how often they were used. But she talked all about that. And that is such a big part of understanding, like you said, your subgenre, your audience. Who is your audience, So those are all very big pieces to take in consideration when you're trying to launch yourself into the world. And something I had actually talked about, and that was in an episode. I know I keep talking about all the episodes I've done.
No, that's good. That's good.
With Bree from the Categorically Romance podcast. We actually talked about being podcasters, especially in the romance space. And one thing that I had learned the hard way, and that's why I kind of put together the podcast, and I kind of really seek out certain people to kind of help me kind of figure out, okay, if I want to write a book, where do I go? How do I start? Or if I'm 10 books deep into an author career, what else would I want to know? Something I had learned the hard way is I didn't send any kind of promotion. I had no clue who my audience was. And I still launched into the world to the same soundtrack that you did. Wah, wah. So I kind of fell flat, but it was actually, it evolved as I went. And I think authors have a natural track to evolve too. I think we all like you've mentioned, you kind of grew as an author, kind of being on this indie author path for a while. And that's exactly how I've done it too, is I've kind of evolved, and the podcast evolved into kind of, and even now it's kind of evolving still, but it's on this track that I think best fits to my strengths. And I think that's what you want to do as an author, kind of find the right track for you that fits your strengths and something you want to continue doing. Have fun.
Fun is so important. And I love that you're talking about this. And because I think it's really important, and I have seen it many, many times in the with the authors that I mentor. There's this belief that they have to pick a path, or pick who they are and what they're doing and stick with it and never evolve, and that's just silly. Like you're going to launch, you're going to decide, like, so my brand colors have changed over the last 3 years because I have evolved and gotten clearer on who I am. And my books have started. I mean, I've already recovered my books that were published in 2020 and retitled them. I did them in a little bit of a sneaky way because I just kind of used I re-subtitled them so that I could use the subtitles as larger, because I realized that what I was writing was closer to rom-com than just straight up contemporary romance. I thought I was one thing, but I realized after getting to know the market and getting to know my voice, really, that what I was writing was leaning more into rom-com than just, definitely not Colleen Hoover, who I adore, but that's, I am at the other end of the spectrum from the emotions that are in the Colleen Hoover books, right?
Right.
So I don't want to look like Colleen Hoover. I want to look like Annika Martin. I want to look like J.J. Knight. I want to look more like those folks who are writing the funnier, lighter stories.
Well, and you mentioned something which I thought was an interesting topic, because I've heard of several other authors doing the same thing, that they're already in their career as an author. They've gotten, like, maybe, like I said, 7, 8 books out already. But they either aren't getting much traction, or the books are wildly different from where they are now as a writer. Like,
Mhm.
even though that was like 4 or 5 years ago, it may not seem like that long ago, but they've grown significantly since they've been started their author journey, and they go back and they revise it and change it. Do you think there is value then in relaunching maybe either yourself as an author or a book?
I think there absolutely is. And I think there are good times to do it. Now, I am not an expert in relaunching, but I
Mm.
have information, right? So I would say there is Joe Solari is a gentleman who is working with a number of authors, a couple who I know and I'm friends with. And he is helping them, authors who have got who have been very established, like with 30 or 40 books, relaunch with different pen names. Because what can happen is, if you are an author who has several books published and you have, let's say for instance, you've written some steamy, and you've written some Why Choose, and you might have written a Small Town Sweet series. It's all you, it's all your voice. That's great. But those are different readers.
Mhm.
And Amazon, we'll just use them as the granddaddy, or the whatever, the Bubba, the big one of the retailers. Um, what happens is your sales algorithms get all messed up. So when a reader goes to my name,
Mhm.
and let's say for instance, I've published some steamy and some sweet contemporary, and a sweet reader, so someone who wants to read books that don't have any sex in them, sees one of my man chest covers, they're going to go, not for me, and they will back out of my page on Amazon. If you have that happen enough times, Amazon's algorithms are going to start to judge you and say, this is an author who does not sell books. This is an author who doesn't, like, we are not going to give the algorithmic boost to these books anymore, because they're not selling. And so that can actually ruin an author's income. So I've got a couple of friends who, like I said, they're more than 30 books each, and they're relaunching with new pen names. They're starting fresh. We don't even know what their pen names are. Their friends don't even know, because they don't want to mess up the algorithms. So they're going to start, or they're restarting. Both of them are publishing in the fall. They're pre-writing a bunch of books in their new subgenre, whatever it is, with their new pen name, and they are going to start fresh. Their old books will continue to be there. An author may or may not decide to rebrand. An interesting thing that I'm seeing now too is, for instance, if you have heard of Mariana Zapata,
I think I
she
have.
wrote The Wall of Winnipeg and Me, which was one of the very
Oh.
first romances I read. It was one that someone said, one of my friends said, you have to read this book as a perfect romance novel. It's kind of, and it has over 30,000 reviews on Amazon. And it was originally released in 2017. But even though that book is doing so well, it's being re-released. The book, so Mariana Zapata is not relaunching, but she is relaunching this book such that it's on pre-order now with 30,000 reviews, which is really interesting. It has a new cover. It has new content. So she's edited an old book that's done very, very well for her.
Mm.
And if someone who is that accomplished is doing it, there has to be some really great marketing intelligence behind it. Pippa Grant recently also just did that. She's an author that I read a lot of, and she relaunched a book that has over 3,000, like 3,600 reviews. It used to be called Master Baker, and now it's called Dirty Talking Rival. And so, looking at the audience, looking at reader expectations, she has leaned more into what will sell, to who she knows her readers are now from who she knew they were when she first launched that book. I mean, I'm assuming that's why she's doing it. She's doing it because there's going to be a positive impact on her bottom line and finding readers, the right readers.
And you make a valid point. I had a publisher actually reach out and put for their PR list, mention some authors, and one of them was for a book. And I thought it was kind of weird because I looked it up and I was like, why does this have 20,000 reviews already? And it was a New York Times bestseller already. And I was like, how did that happen? And turns out it was released. It was like released 15 years ago, and it was like an anniversary edition.
Uh-huh.
So I was
Yeah.
like, That explains it. And that was something I thought was really interesting, that they're doing this kind of whole rebrand. Like you said, new covers. I think there was a little bit of extra story or a new extra insert there. Maybe a epilogue or something,
Yeah.
to add to for a little extra for readers. So
Well, and from a book 15 years ago, like there might even be elements. I don't know what this one is, but you can think 15 years ago, consent wasn't written the same way in romance, right? Like
very
there are
true.
things that using condoms, or like there are a lot of things that might feel very subtle, like not your grandma's bodice rippers. Like we are not writing the same kinds of romance as 15 years ago were being written and published. So it's possible that that's also being updated for what readers expect now in terms of the conversations that happen before a sex act happens, for instance. And language, right? Like language continues to evolve, and there are things that we probably don't want to be saying in books to be sensitive.
Very true. And possibly even if certain technologies were used
Oh
and
yeah,
the mentioned in the book, probably way different now.
yeah,
But yeah.
yeah.
And speaking of which, should authors make a big investment when launching themselves before their books, or do they even need to?
I believe that has to be decided by each author. Do they have to? Do you have to make a big investment? Absolutely not. I have opinions about editing. So,
Mm,
before a launch, your book has to be ready. And in my world, a book that's ready has been edited. Now, I personally have an editor who I work with and I love. It took me a couple of editors to find her. I have published a book without hiring an editor, but I had beta readers and ARC readers who were giving me like, oh, you've got a typo here and there's a double word there. And I went through quite a long, arduous process of making sure the book was ready. So in a pre-launch, I mean, I guess it's not part of the launch process, but it absolutely is part of being ready to launch, which is making sure that you have it. And if you don't have a budget, like let's say you have a $500 budget for
mm,
launching, and I guess that's a really important thing to talk about, is if you're thinking of launching a romance book as a career. This is, step one in a new career that you're launching. You are a business, right? I know you've spoken to someone about being an authorpreneur, and you are, like, I coached new businesses as part of one of my jobs, working with a credit union for a number of years. When you're an author, you are a business. You have expenses, and the expenses can be things as, from software all the way to the cost to launch, which might be having a website which has an annual cost and you have to buy your URL, paying for ARC services, advanced review copy services, to get some reviews up on your book as soon as it launches or before it launches on Goodreads and BookBub. And if you're got your act together, if you do a paperback, then you can start getting your reviews on Amazon and the retailers even before your ebook launches, which is, part of the whole strategy. Is how are you doing a soft launch or a hard launch? I realize I'm talking all around this, but there are, in terms of money, there are so many different ways that you can launch. You can do a soft launch, which I have done more times than a hard launch, which just means I let my people know in advance to get pre-orders so that there's a little bit of a lift to the algorithm on the day that the book launches. I am right now with the Billionaire's Shrubbery doing a hard launch. So I have got over 250 ARC people who downloaded the advanced review copy. And I made sure that those are going to be spread over social media and the retailers and Goodreads and BookBub. And that costs money. Like I had to spend money on 5 different ARC services to get the kind of reach that I wanted. If it's your first book, you can get MailerLite for free. There are so many different email service providers. Flowdesk is beautiful, but it's expensive and you don't need it right when you launch. ConvertKit is expensive and then you can do so many different things with it. You don't need it when you launch. Free MailerLite is good enough. Knowing that you can take your names and move them over to Flowdesk once you've got a reader list that, and you've got, how you want to be presenting yourself, once you've got, you're starting to get established. How much do you want to invest in your cover? 100 Covers is a service that charges $100 for an ebook. They do a really great job. My first books, I paid over $250 per cover. Was it worth it? I don't know. I mean, yes, because it gave me confidence. I guess that's another piece of the launch. How much you spend is what will give you the confidence to launch and know that you're doing the best job that you can for your book and for your, assuming you want this as a career, your author career. I don't use that designer anymore, even though she did a fine job, because I know how to read the market now. So I can use different services that are less expensive and give me as good results because I know what to ask for and I know what my market is looking for in a cover.
And that's why it's so important to kind of think prior before you do launch your book. And I had talked about this on another podcast where I mentioned like 4 months is usually like kind of a sweet spot that I've seen for at least my industry of launching something. And usually we stair step it. So like, it's not like a huge, like it's not all the chunk of money right now. It's kind of a stair step.
Yes, I 100% agree. And the launch is a multi-month process. So there's the pre-published author has got all of those pieces to put in place before the launch, but then the actual book launch itself is a whole other thing that has its whole other process. And I know that you have actually a podcast episode on how to do a successful book launch. Carolyn Choate. Yeah, she's got a brilliant process or like steps to go through to have a good launch. And that some of those come with dollars attached and some don't, but it really truly can be as little as $100 and as much as several $1,000s for a launch. It just depends on what your capacity is and what your goals are. Back to your goals.
Yeah. And you actually on your website, you have a author resource guide that's free. You kind of curated some of those resources already that like, if an author's like, this is so much, I don't know where to start with, like, how do I do the research? You've already done the research.
Thank you. Yes, I have done an amount of research. And also on my website, there is an opportunity to get a free, like 30-minute, like, let's do it. Let's take 30 minutes to figure out what the next step in your launch strategy could be to make you feel confident and to be a really smart next step. It's one of those things that I want to do to give back. So it's it's not a sales call. Just if you're interested in talking about, well, what do you think I could do that would be strategic as my next step before I launch my book? I'm happy to talk to you because there are a number of questions I'll ask before we meet, and then we'll talk about a couple of things that you could be looking at that would be beneficial to you where you are right now and with your goals, because there really isn't a one size fits all.
Everyone's journey is so personal and it looks so unique. Everyone has a different method. Everyone has a different path that they walk that works for them.
Yeah, so important. Like that's back in the day, like before I published my first book, when most of my mentors were just like me, they were pre-published. We were all part of the Bernard WA group and barely anybody was published. It was like, you'd see the latest, greatest thing. Joanna Penn would say something and everybody would go running off in the Joanna Penn direction. And then someone else would say, David Gaughran would say something different. And you'd be running off to David Gaughran's side. It's like, it's exhausting. And yes, Joanna Penn's method is going to work for some people. And David Gaughran's method is going to work for a lot of people. But the method that works for you is going to be the one that works for you. And it doesn't matter what worked for other people. What matters is what works for you. And that's a combination of your personality and your budget and your story and the size of your community and the time that you have. And if you have children at home and all them different things, like there's so many different things. Yeah.
Exactly. And like and where you are, and you mentioned like the Authorpreneur podcast episode where I talked to Kathryn, and that is something she very much pressed and was really eye-opening to me. She says, what worked maybe 6 months ago may not work right now. And that's okay. You have to find what works for you right now.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. The landscape changes so quickly.
Does. It does. And that's something that I found is very interesting. We kind of talked about like anthologies and things like that. And I know they used to be all the rage back in the day. I still see them occasionally, but not nearly as much, I feel like. And that's something I've seen kind of change over time. And what I'm seeing right now for people to build up their author brand or their readership pretty quickly is you mentioned novellas. I'm seeing like rapid releases of novellas happening.
Mhm. Yeah, and that works for people who can sit down and who are fast writers and who have the time to do that. But yeah,
Mhm.
the other thing you can do, like there's an author I'm working with right now, and she's got 4 books that are written, and she's got her editor booked, one for September, one for October, one for November. So she's going to be able to rapid release in 2024, or maybe even starting in late 2023. But she's been working on this for years. So, it's like sometimes it takes, if you're the kind of personality who has the patience to sit on something, you can do that. There are others of us who are like, no, I have this done and I want it out in the world. I need to publish this one before I will be able to start writing the next one. That's my personality. It's like, I need to see how something does before I start working on the next one. I get information from that.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm kind of the same way. I kind of like, I'll try out new things on the podcast and then I'll go back and like we were talking earlier, number crunch, because I'm kind of a
Yeah.
nerd that way. What's something that would be a really quick win for like an author who's just like, all right, I need to kind of get started on my track as an author my author brand before I start, there's so much work that goes in before launching the book. What is a really good quick win to start before you launch?
I think, okay, if you've picked your pen name, a really good quick win is go and claim your Instagram, your Facebook page, and just post a couple of things. Just post a couple of things to say, like that put you in the world as a romance author. You don't have to even have to draw a lot of attention to it. There's an emotional, psychological impact with being public that way.
Mm.
And it's simple, right? It's author Danika Bloom at Instagram, or in your Instagram. Get your Gmail account in your author name and start subscribing to author newsletters in your subgenre, and make it all go to that author Gmail account so that you can start to feel like you're part of that community and it's in a place. It's not all mixed up with emails from work and all those other things. Like, treat this like it is, in fact, what it is, which is a business. You're an author. This is it could be a hobby, but it's, you don't mix all your knitting stuff with your guitar strings, right? It's a hobby that stays in its own lane. So, or it's a career. And I think those are really easy, no cost, and can have a really profound psychological positive impact.
And do you have like one of the biggest kind of misses like that you see authors make that you see that you're like, okay, you can avoid this?
Something that I see, and I kind of mentioned this, I believe, earlier too, is believing that whatever you do right now is permanent and unchangeable. So know that wherever you are right now is good enough. It is good enough,
Mm.
right? It is not wrong. It is as it should be. And you can adjust and adapt as you get to know who you are, and as you start to connect with the communities that you feel are your people. So just don't be afraid. That's the biggest miss, is waiting because you're not sure.
Mhm.
Do it.
I love that. I love that, like kind of ending on that kind of note. That's a very positive and great way to look at it. Miss Danika, we have talked all about like awesome author tactics to use if you want to launch yourself before ever hitting that publish button. So, where can listeners find your books and how can they connect with you?
Well, I am right now, my books are all in Kindle Unlimited, so you can find me on Amazon. Danika Bloom is where you can see them if you don't want to pop over to Amazon, but they are all listed there. And then my community that supports romance authors specifically is called Author Ever After. So authoreverafter.com. And that's where, if you pop over there, you can grab 30 minutes to chat with me about your launch strategy or your mindset. You'll also see on that site, if you're struggling with mindset, I have an SMS course, which is a text-based course, which is so much fun. It's 21 days. I'll pop into your cell phone and give you a little prompt and some words of encouragement to keep you moving forward if you are finding yourself stuck in your process. So the Author Ever After community is the place where I am most active, though, and that would be where I would love to meet any author at pretty well any stage, but my focus is really on supporting those who are not yet published, because there's just so much, there's so much we can do that is really easy to get you launching with confidence and without wasting a lot of money too.